Nipun, shall we start?
Yeah, it's just uploading.
Okay, sure. Not a problem.
I think another...
Yeah, 10-15 seconds. Yeah. There is a lag of two minutes no, sir, between FB and the real time. So.
Bro, you can start.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again on Tiffin Talks today. Today, we have noted author Shylashri Shankar with us, whose new book, A Taste Journey Across the Turmeric Nation, is doing wonderful rounds across sections. And we have none other than Sourish Bhattacharyya, very senior journalist and a very, very close friend, to take this session ahead. Over to you, Sourish. Thank you.
Thank you, Pawan. I'm very fortunate to have Shylashri on this panel because, we have been talking about this book, I think, for 3 or 4 years now, and I believe she spent a lot of time working on this, wonderful book called Turmeric. I don't know whether I can, how does one? Okay. I'm a little, people are wondering what I'm doing, but I'm trying, okay, I've got a bit of the book in. Okay, anyway, I'll try to get my act a little better. Yeah, okay, fine. Well, I'm holding the book to show that I have read the book, and then this is a very important milestone. I think I see when I talk about the history of food writing in India, I think of 4 milestones or 3 milestones, the big milestones. One, of course, is K.T. Acharya's monumental historical dictionary of Indian food, which was published in the early 1980s. And interestingly, K.T. Acharya was a scientist. He was a food scientist at the Central Food Technology Research Institute in Mysore. Again, he wasn't a food writer in the sense of the term we now use, or nor was he an influencer or a blogger. He was just a hardcore researcher who did his work very well. After that, of course, we had a long gap. I don't know. I consider Chitrita Banerjee's Eating India to be another definitive book on giving the worldwide audience an overview of what Indian food is all about and the many universes within it. It's like one universe, many galaxies. It's like a continent of taste, really. So that's the one book that I've personally benefited a lot. I've, of course, Colleen Taylor Saint's definitive book. Also, Shylashri, you and Colleen have the same publisher, Speaking Tiger. I think Colleen took a big leap forward and brought us up to date on a lot of the gaps in Indian food history which were left by Acharya. And now, Shylashri, we have you. So, Shylashri, interestingly, you have a very, you're not the typical, like what people understand by a food journalist in our country. You're not that, unlike, say, someone like Kunal Vijayakar, who's also, of course, a theatre personality, or, Rahul Verma or Mariam Reshi. And, we have people who only write on food. They write on restaurants, they write on chefs, they write on food. But, you have been writing on issues as diverse as Sri Lanka and Manrega, You've been writing on human rights, you've been writing on courts. So how did your interest in food grow? And, then I'll come to, my understanding of what makes Turmeric Nation special. But how did you get into writing about food?
I wanted to first thank you, Sourish, for inviting me on this show. Yeah, I mean, that's a question I keep getting asked. And actually, when I first started writing, it was Prasanna Rajan of Open Magazine, the editor. He said, why don't you write for us? And I said, look, I'm really not interested that much in writing about political science as much as I want to write about food. So he said, why food? And I said, well, it's because it's just something that I've been reading for years and years. And, I love reading food memoirs. I used to read lots of recipe books, and I used to sort of go to sleep reading books. I mean, they were really interesting because this sort of takes you back to a different age. And I just thought that I would try and start writing it. And when I first started, I wasn't sure where I was going to go. And, I'm trained as a political scientist. So we have definite boundaries. So we have theories. We have to be very, very strict about the kinds of boundaries we sort of range or we wander in. But with food, I just let my mind wander wherever it wanted to go, and it was an experiment. So this book is actually a result of an experiment. And I mean, sometimes it's sort of I sort of read a whole bunch of things. I started with a question, and then the question would take me to other questions, and then I would go off and look at science, anthropology, archaeology, legal anthropology, and then and food studies, and then try and come up with my own little theories.
In fact, that's what I loved about Turmeric Nation. And again, read out the for those who haven't seen the book yet, it's Turmeric Nation, and the key line is a passage to India's taste. Of course, it's more than a passage to India's taste. I think it's a passage through a lot of little rivers that make up the ocean of India's taste. There are, of course, some bits which are very contemporary, which are very relevant to contemporary politics. And then there are, of course, issues which I think need to be now understood a little more by people who are studying food. The question I would like to ask is that this whole question of is there a theory, or is there a need now for a multidisciplinary study of Indian food? Is there a need now for people from various academic disciplines to come together and start talking about Indian food, not in the sense of okay, which restaurant did you go to last night, but in terms of understanding the history, origins, and evolution of what I call the Indian food culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, and I think, I really found Colleen Taylor-Sen, who's also on the show right now. I mean, I really found her book really fascinating because I think that was sort of one of the more recent attempts to sort of think about food from a more theoretical angle. And of course, Katie Acharya, who you mentioned, and also Khare, who wrote this book in 1976, which was also about food. I mean, that's a lot about, but that's about Hindu.
Ravindra Khare.
With food. So yeah, I mean, I think, Sourish, I think we need to sort of go beyond just restaurant reviews or because there are lots of people with a lot of passion for food, and I think if you connect that with other disciplines, I think we'll have a much more richer narrative about India, because India is very rich and it is there are lots of, it's like chaotic pluralism. And, we sort of have these multiple centuries within ourselves and around us. And I think we're doing it a disservice if we just focus on one thing. So this plural element would be very interesting to sort of examine.
Right. In fact, it reminds me of a very interesting thing. Long time when I was a little boy, there was a book by Bronowski, who was an anthropologist, and who was once, I think he wrote a book on the ascent of man, if I'm not mistaken. That was the book. and he talked about India and how, how Stone Age ways of cooking, coexisted with the modern, gas cylinder. At that time, the gas cylinder was considered modern. He wrote in the early 70s. And so, we have those little chulas which we see coming alight, every evening. Even now, of course, they're slowly going out of fashion in the cities. But most rural homes still have those chulas. Whether we have, any Ujjala Yojana or something, whatever we may have, but chulas still remain the backbone of the Indian kitchen economy. So we have these, actually multiple millennia coexisting together in the food universe of India. So how does one capture this? And, I'll come to then specifics from the book, but, you actually set out to capture this vast array of, experiences that exist in our food culture. How did you do it?
Yeah, no, so I think my starting point was not about Indian food. My ending point was, the publisher said we should talk about Indian food. But my starting point was me, and the questions. And so I think one way to do it, which was my way, was to actually begin with a whole series of questions, and then see where the questions take you, and then instead of trying to sort of capture something called Indian food, because I think that is like a chimera, and it's really hard to capture something like that. I think it's literally like the Naipaul book, India, A Million Mutinies. It's literally that. So you have end with that, with the million mutinies. And what you do is you go and study the million mutinies. So I think that's probably one way to do it.
That's right. So which sort of like we had, you mentioned Ravindra Khare, and the amount of work he did about Hindu rituals and the place of food in Hindu rituals. And what I found very interesting in your book, and because I also know the gentleman concerned, Chandrabhan Prasad, you talk to him, and of course you talk about Dalit food.
Yeah.
Now, frankly, in all our discussions, Dalit food has never been seen as a separate entity in it, by itself. In fact, I was first made aware of it by Chandrabhan Prasad, whom you quote extensively. And of course, you talk about, say, a Dalit wedding feast. What kind of food is served there, and what happens there. Can you explain a bit about the research that went into understanding Dalit food?
Yeah, I mean, I also didn't know very much about Dalit food, and one of my colleagues at CPR introduced me to Chandrabhan Prasad, and we started talking, and I was horrified by how insular and how blinkered in such blinkered existences we live, right? Because we actually don't know how a lot of different communities and groups actually eat. So this whole thing about dried meat, he said, because I said, what is Dalit food? And he said, have you ever eaten bread made of dried peas? And then it turns out that they eat peas for every meal, because, and maybe with chilies or maybe just with salt, because they can't afford anything else. And but at the same time, when we were talking about feasts, what was interesting was that his description of how they cooked the piglet or the wild or the pig was very similar to the kinds of things you hear in the West, because I was also watching this Chef's Table, which was it was on Faviken, which is a Swedish restaurant, and run by Marcus Nielsen. And again, there it's this whole notion that you use every part of the animal, and you cook with every. So you take the blood, you take the skin, you do, and you just put salt, and that's essentially what Chandrabhan Prasad told me that they use in the Dalit food. Not because, but the difference between the two was that Nielsen can afford any ingredient in the world, whereas the Dalits could not afford anything else apart from salt. So they literally salt and perhaps chilies. And for them, the most, this was the other thing. When I called my book Turmeric Nation, turmeric is not just used by everybody, but it's also aspired by, to be used by people. So for Dalits, like saying that when a marriage broker shows up in the village, the girl's family asks the broker, does the boy's family use turmeric the whole year? Because that's what shows prosperity in the groom's family. And haldiya dal is actually something which is very
yeah, in fact, I was asking, I wanted to know more about haldiya dal, Can you explain a bit about it for the benefit of our viewers?
Of what? Of haldiya dal?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean why they wanted haldiya dal?
Yeah.
Oh, because they couldn't afford turmeric, and it wasn't very clear.
Okay.
And it's one of these things, I suppose. I mean, which anybody, like, if you want to aspire to a particular standard of living, you sort of seize on certain things, right? That other people who are at that standard have, and almost everybody there would cook with haldi, because that's part of cooking the dal. But the Dalits could not, the ones who were working in the fields could not really, they didn't have lentils, they couldn't afford onions, they couldn't afford anything. So haldi was actually seen as something which is very precious, I think, for them. So I think that's what it was. But I think one has to ask Chandraban Prasad this.
Right. Because it's interesting. I have had only one interaction with Chandraban Prasad, where he actually, he said that, look, how can you come to my house without eating, So he served me a lovely dinner with, mustard oil, kachi ghani ka mustard oil. And, he used a haldi which he got from Maharashtra, from a village in Maharashtra. And, I told him that I've never had anything like this, This is naturally because you have haldi mixed with chemicals. Yeah, and, then he showed me the real color of haldi. And, he says that most of the haldi that you get in Delhi or other cities is more like ochre, more like saffron than haldi, Whereas the real haldi color is very different, It is a bright marigold yellow, so that sort of showed, I mean, if you have actually haldi grown in a very traditional, organic way, what a different creature you get out of the soil, And that, of course, again, it opened my eyes towards haldi, It also another, thing that brings me very interestingly, among the many figures you quote in your in a book, one that stood out is that about 14.5 million Dalits said that they eat beef in the in the National Sample Survey Organization, figures that you quoted. Now that is, again, it shows that beef, as we tend to see it, is not equated with one religion or one community.
Yeah.
So can you talk, because you have devoted an entire chapter to beef, and I think it's a very rational discussion. Against the hot-headed discussions that we have had so far in the public space. Can you explain something more about the beef culture in India?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this whole question of beef and also veg, non-veg has been going on for centuries, basically. And when you look at some of the ancient texts, what you find is that, in the Yajurveda, for instance, the ceremonies actually require the meat of cattle. And then in Ayurveda, you actually have a verse which says that the flesh of cows, buffaloes, and hogs should not be eaten daily, which means that they can be eaten at some points, right? So
right.
I think we, and also if you come fast forward to 2011, 12, for instance, this NSSO data, which you just mentioned, which basically says that about 13.5 million Hindus, who are mainly Dalits, can eat beef, and about 42% Muslims, and about 26% Christians eat beef.
Right.
So the question then becomes, why are these people using beef? This kind of an agitation.
Yeah.
And this goes back again to our history.
Right.
And so so beef is something where during the freedom struggle,
Right.
there was this whole movement about how do you create a homogenous set of people, like what could unite all the Hindus
Right.
together. And what Vivekananda found was that he thought that beef, but a lot of Hindus don't eat beef, so let's use beef as the motive. And
Right.
there is this whole thing about revering cows
Right.
within the religion. So let's
Right.
do that. And so he used the notion. So he set up. He and also Tilak. They
Right.
also cow protection societies in the late 1880s and 1890s.
Right.
Societies. What they did was they also had these revolutionary cells where and there those people would go off and shoot the British, and there was all this revolutionary stuff going on. But the societies themselves, what they did was they would go and beat up Muslim butchers, because Muslims were the ones who were basically who had the abattoirs and who were running the shops. And so you have that lineage going on, and when you come to the post independence during the constitution framing debates, they wanted to bring cow protection as part of the fundamental rights, but Gandhi opposed it, and he said, "Look, you cannot impose one religion on somebody on the other religions." So that's why it actually moved to the directive principle, and it also became a state subject. So what you now find is that beef law, beef is banned in about almost all of India, but except a few states like Kerala, West Bengal, and the Northeast. And the reason it's not banned in those is because the beef eaters are much higher in those states.
Right, exactly.
Ban it, right? So, but they left it to the states to do it.
Right.
And beef, I think, is sort of the way in which they want to try and bring together a Hindu identity and then connect it to an Indian identity. So it's basically Hindu equals Indian, which is not we all of us who've grown up in India. Many of us don't see it that way.
That's right.
We see ourselves as part of a plural identity.
Right. Right. And in fact, that's what I feel that the central message of Turmeric Nation is, it is a celebration of a plurality, and it is, it just says that, like, for instance, we cannot equate beef with a particular religion. We cannot also, interestingly, I just realized that, when it was the Congress which pushed the beef agenda at the beginning, so even the contemporary political narrative is like, needs to be revised, because if you see all the states and all the original leaders of the Gauraksha movement were all card-holding congressmen, and they were the ones who banned beef, in their respective states. We had people like Purushottam Das Tandon, or Govind Ballabh Pant, and all, or even Rajendra Prasad. They all believe in Gauraksha, and Mahatma Gandhi had to really rein them in, because I think he understood the nature of Indian society much better than most of them did. And I think, and that also had a very corrective, influence on the discussions in the Constituent Assembly. So, like you have some very funny, episodes about, lemonade. There was a movement against lemonade, because lemonade was supposed to have been served or, made by Muslims in Bengal. So, what is the story behind it?
Oh, the lemonade and
some Bengali Bhadraloks got it.
Food is such a great way to stoke revolutionary sentiments, right? So which is why I think taking beef as a way to do it is not very unusual. So lemonade and bread, you see, bread and lemonade were actually made by lower castes and also mainly by Muslims.
You're right.
So those were banned for the upper castes.
Right.
So in Bengal, in the early 19th century, you had the Brahmo Samaj, which had started. And Brahmo Samaj did not ban this for anybody. So a number of the youth and many young boys in Bengal wanted to join the Brahma Samaj because they could actually have lemonade and bread. And so I actually have them in the memoirs where they say, look, the main reason bread was the main reason I joined Brahma Samaj. So, so it's interesting that when you taboo something, then it becomes extremely powerful, and you want to actually break the taboo and actually connect to the taboo. It's interesting what they found in studies is that when you if you have one thing that is taboo, then people want to break it, right? But if you hide that taboo thing amongst other things that people can do, then it's fine. So when Vivekananda said, don't eat beef, but he also said, please eat meat. Because he said that if you only eat vegetables, you're weak.
Right.
Meat, and that's strong. So he hid the beef taboo within this larger thing of eating other foods, which sort of, made it easier for people, I think, to.
Also, I think Vivekananda was sort of reflecting the typical Bengali middle class mindset, This very anti-beef, sort of, and for a long time even anti-chicken, The only non-vegetarian item which was sort of allowed in, of course, apart from fish, which was not considered non-vegetarian, was the goat meat, and that too because goats were sacrificed before Kali, so they were seen as sacrificial meat, So I guess there was sort of, let me tell you, in my family, my my mother's family started having, when they were my great grandparents, who from my maternal side, they were loyalists of the Raj, and they naturally, because they were loyal to the Raj, they insisted on having bread and other things. And so when my mother would go to Darjeeling for her holidays, eating bread was a real novelty because no one they would not eat bread at home, So, it brings back a lot of memories that way, So interestingly, though, that what was not considered right in Bengal, I mean, became part of the mass culture in Maharashtra, vada pav. In Maharashtra, pav became a big thing, sort of. And so how do, it's interesting that the same prejudices did not work in Maharashtra.
Yeah, I mean, that I think needs another study because,
I mean, you're actually, you've asked so many questions that each question can lead to a little, one PhD thesis by itself, I think.
Oh, totally, totally.
Coming to another very interesting question, of course, is, you did do a lot of, I think, preliminary work on, on cookbooks. And I think, Arjun Napadharai had written an entire tract on Indian cookbooks and, talked about how this whole, the new nationalism, the post-independence nationalism was in a sense cemented in a very big way by cookbooks. And that was his, of course, his big, study on Indian cookbooks. Now, what has been your reading of Indian cookbooks?
Sorry?
And of course, what has been your reading of Indian cookbooks? And of course, you've seen the Anglo-Indian cookbooks as well as the local, Indian cookbooks in our own languages. What is the world that emerges out of these cookbooks?
I didn't quite catch your question.
No. My thing is, what is the world that emerges out of these cookbooks? Do you see a new nation emerging out of them, as Arjun Appadurai had, argued in his much quoted essay, or do you see them just being recipe books? Like there's nothing to read more into them than just being recipe books.
I'm really sorry, Sourish, but I just can't hear you very well.
I think I don't know.
Can you just do it one more time? Yeah. Say.
Okay, what I am saying, can you hear me now?
Now it's better. Thank you.
Okay. What I am saying is that, is there, I mentioned Arjun Appadurai's famous essay on cookbooks, and you must have, of course, you have mentioned it in your book also.
Yeah.
There he sort of posited that in many ways cookbooks were mirrors of a new nation that was emerging.
Right.
Especially in the middle class, the idea of India was in many ways also created by the cookbooks, which sort of grew in circulation after independence. What has been your reading of cookbooks, and
Right.
what kind of world do you see emerging out of these
Okay.
cookbooks that
So
you've studied?
in cookbooks, you have there are different periods, right? So when you go back to, like, say, the imperial periods, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, the Mughal periods, for instance, you find that the cookbooks were sort of reflected the tastes, or were written by the imperial cooks, but we don't really know who they were, and they were usually written for the emperor. And then, so you have Babur, or Aurangzeb, for instance, or Shah Jahan, any of these. So you sort of get the recipes, and you get a sense of what they liked. And this happens also in the West, in England, for instance, where all the queen and the entire family used to have this cookbook where they would add recipes, and the kinds of food that was produced required a lot of ingredients, and the ingredients were all very, very expensive, because it was all about theater and about pomp and ceremony and all of that. Then you come to the colonial period, where the cookbooks tend to be written by the English, both men and women, but mainly women. And they tend to sort of be much more prescriptive in terms of telling the others who've come into India, this is how you behave with the natives, with your cook, and this is what you do. But you also see a hybrid nature of the cuisine, and this happens also with the imperial cuisines, because the cuisines come in, but they, like, say, the Mughal cuisine sort of mixes with the local cuisine, and that's what the hybrid then shows up in these cookbooks, and you can see that happening over the course of different emperors. Similarly, with the British ones, that you find the hybrids. So you have, like, Mullik Tawny soup, which is Mulligatani soup, which is rasam. You have puffs, curry puffs, which is actually samosa. That happening. And then post-independence, what you find is the initial set of cookbooks were written by sort of almost, you have Tarla Dalal. I think that was a little bit later, perhaps. You have Mr. Kabir Singh, who wrote in the 1950s.
Right. That was immediately after independence.
Yeah, and I still have her cookbook.
Yeah.
It's like timeless. So, like, cookbooks which are written, and then that's supposed to be used by the cook by the lady of the house to tell the cook to do things. And then you have, like, Madhur Jaffrey and all of them, who then come later.
Right.
You transition from you sort of have a bridge to the West. So now you begin to talk about courses. You begin to sort of frame the cookbook in a different way. Because if you look at the Balbir Singh cookbook, it's a mishmash. If you look at Meenakshi Ammal, it's all a mishmash.
Right.
Or, written for young girls who get married, and then they know how to cook, and then they're supposed to look at this and try and figure out how to cook. So now you have cookbooks that actually are geared towards people who want to experiment with a lot of different cuisines, and who are very interested in the taste of food, in layering of those tastes. So it's a very different clientele now, I think, for cookbooks. And it's also become much more of a hybrid of the West and the East. So the Western way of framing it. So you have soups and salads, and so if you look at the way in which the cookbook
is structured,
like any other cookbook in the world, right? So, yeah.
So, but I also see in India a lot of cookbooks now are talking. They have a narrative, which earlier they did not have.
Exactly.
So they're like more like memoirs than sort of any thoughts on those.
Yeah, so a lot of I think the more recent ones in the last decade or so, at least, is people want to sort of retain or somehow save old recipes, because you have a whole generation dying out now. And it's literally like, my grandmother's recipe, or and the way people had cooked at that time, and the kinds of things they used. I think there was a whole urge to sort of save that, and I think that's what is creating more regional
Right.
and a more memoir-driven narrative.
Right.
So.
Right. Interestingly, Pavan, can you help me with one thing? I see Colleen and Mariam on the line on our chat room. Pavan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can you unmute Colleen, please?
Oh, sure, sir. Why not? Hold on.
And so that we can see her also.
Yeah, she's unmuted, sir. She can speak. Absolutely. Her speaker is on.
Only we can't see her.
I'll just do that as well.
It's early in Chicago and she's up and awake, So,
Colleen,
Yeah,
you can switch on your video as well, please. You can. I have just.
please switch on the video, Colleen.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, hi.
Now you can see her.
Yeah. So, Colleen, any thoughts? Any question you'd like to ask Shylashri?
I'm sorry, what?
Any thoughts on what we have discussed so far? Any questions you would like to ask Shylashri?
I think it should.
No, actually, I tried to order your book online. I can't get a hard copy, which I'd like to have, but I was able to get an e-copy. So I just downloaded it yesterday on Kindle. So I've just started writing it, but it looks really great.
Thank you. Well, I found your book extremely useful. So, I mean, it sort of really helped me think through a lot of the way in which I could actually frame the book. So, because I think you went through the whole thing about what exactly is Indian food. And you, I think, came down on the to the conclusion that it's actually very plural and, it's like multiple cuisines and it's more regional cuisine, right? So
there isn't any such thing as Indian food, really. I mean, it's like saying European food, but even more diverse because of all the religions and the languages. And yeah, I think what's needed now is people need to start writing books on regional cuisines. I mean, writing a book on Indian cuisine, it's fine, but, someone should write I've been asking Preeta Sen for years to write a book on Bengali cuisine, but I don't know, it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and I think Bengali cuisine would be really interesting because Bengal has had a very interesting history of thinking about food in myriad number of ways, right? So I think that would be really interesting because it wouldn't just be about Bengali cuisine. It would be about Bengali cuisine with history, literature, a whole bunch of other things added to it. So I think sorry, she should be writing it.
Well, yeah, if I can stop eating, well, I will definitely, please keep Colleen on the online, please. Mariam, I see Mariam Reshi is on line also. Pavan, can you get her live?
Yeah, sure, sir. 1 second.
Yeah.
I just want to say something while we're waiting. Another thing that people need to do is go through the archives of, I met a young woman who was going through the archives of one of the Punjabi Maharajas and found all kinds of excellent recipes. I lost touch with her, but people should do that too. I mean, go to these kitchens and go to these palaces and grandmother's cooking is fine, but it's just grandmother's. What we need is, really more in-depth recipes going back a long time if they can be found.
In fact, I've been hearing that the recipes of the Maharaja of Patiala are going to be published. And of course, again, that I've been hearing that for 5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
I keep joking that Amarinder Singh became chief minister and everything. But, the recipe book is still not seen, But I think it's his brother who's doing it, Ranveer Singh, the former, head honcho of the Indian Olympic Association. Is Mariam online?
Yes, you can go ahead. Sorry, sir.
Mariam, can you switch on your video, please?
I'm not able to with 2G. I'm really sorry.
No, that's your voice is enough, So any thoughts, questions, Mariam?
Yes, I just want to ask whether there is enough information about Mughal food, because my understanding is that all the history written in Mughal India, I'm just using the word very broadly, has been written by male historians whose only brief was to give a huge PR boost to the emperor concerned about whom they were writing. So lunch was served at 3 o'clock and that's it. I mean, there was no sort of mouth-watering detail about the food that they ate, which is why Mughal food is sort of the bastard child of Indian cuisine. Anyone can just do anything. I mean, we can make butter chicken, put an added dollop of cream in it and call it Mughlai.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what actually happens. I'm very surprised to know that there are actual written information about Mughal food. I'd like to know more about it if that is the case.
Okay, there's actually this book called, what's her name? Salma.
Okay, yes, okay.
It's and she writes about it's in the bibliography. I'll tell you at the end. But she writes about.
No, I have Salma's book.
Yeah.
So
Salma's book, I think, is very familiar. We are all familiar with that.
Yeah,
Those are the...
I actually looked at that, and then there's also this Asafia Cuisines, the Asafia cookbook, which is the Deccan, the Nizam's cook.
The Hyderabadis, yes.
So that's also there, and then there are, of course, as Sourish is mentioning, the Patiala and a whole bunch of princely families. I think the women in the families have started writing about the cuisines. But for Mughals, I mean, I actually looked at that, and then I looked at the Nimatnama,
Nimatnama, yes, absolutely.
So I mean, you're right that, but I'm sure there are lots more of it. I mean, there are a lot more cookbooks which are probably in the archives that we don't know about, because even the Nimatnama she found in the British Library, just while she was looking for other stuff, right? So I wouldn't surprise me if there are these things, and I think Colleen is right that it would be great if people could actually go and research in the archives and come up with these sorts of nuggets, because because I think people in those centuries did keep a lot of records, and particularly the Mughals kept a lot of records. It's not like, you have, they write about gardens and they write about food and they write about a whole bunch of things, the emperors, but I'm sure there are other people who also kept these records. So, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, there are a couple of people, and surprisingly, Indian scholars based, or I think there's one Indian scholar based out of Germany who has done an extensive research on food during the Mughal times. I think, so I will put up, I'll share the reference of the book. Mariam, I'll share it with you. Shylashri will share it with you. It's quite an extensive dissertation, a PhD dissertation on Mughlai cuisine. And there seems to be, in terms of recipes, there seems to be a lack of recipes. No one really recorded recipes very thoroughly, very scientifically in those days. Even, Salma Hussain, who's been doing a lot of work on Mughlai cuisines, hasn't really come across much as yet. Most of the recipes that are available now are available only in the late 19th century.
Right.
That is closer to our time, or sort of as Mariam says, bastardized recipes passed on to us by Anglo-Indian writers.
Exactly. Yeah.
By Anglo-Indian writers, I mean British writers. This, of course, these are the many, as Shylashri, like as I keep saying, that your questions are raising, are pointing to the many directions in which, future studies can go, or the new areas we can tap. Now, one, question, you have a very interesting thought on Buddha's death, and, because can you, for the sake of our viewers, can you, sort of recount your story and your theory about it?
Yeah, so I was looking at, I was sort of interested in, I was going through a whole bunch of journal articles, and I found that there was this whole debate about how did the Buddha die. So one story is that he was fed, he and his disciples showed up in this village in Bihar, and the local blacksmith made invited them to lunch and served them this pig with, served them pig. And Buddha told the blacksmith, do not serve it to my disciples, just serve it to me and bury the rest of it. Now, this story comes, is sort of written in Pali, but Buddha didn't speak Pali, he spoke Magadha. So, it's a different language. And so we already have this question of, is the story accurate? The other story is that he was actually fed a hallucinogenic mushroom. And so that is, Wendy Doniger has written about that one. And that's, and then there was this connection of the mushroom with the divine nectar soma. Now, I always, when one grows up, one sort of reads Panchatantra, and you see this thing of Mohini, Vishnu as Mohini, sort of taking this little pot and then serving soma, and nectar to me was always a liquid, but it turns out that this nectar could have been actually this mushroom. So to me, that was very interesting. And then there's somebody else who did a study on the effects of this mushroom on when it's cooked and when it's dried. So when it's cooked, it's actually much more potent, and it leads to diarrhea and vomiting, which is what Buddha had after a few days, and he died. And so that was, and so my question at the end was that here's a soma, if it is soma is divine, it's nectar, and it's supposed to be something that's immortality. So Buddha, the man, eats this and becomes immortal as Buddha, as the Buddha. So, I mean, it's just a question mark, but, it's still going on, the debate. So,
right. Yeah. So I found it very interesting because, of course, so much of antiquity is sort of buried in so many mysteries. And I think the Buddha's passing away is a mystery which there'll be lots of, did he OD on mushrooms, or did he sort of, what happened, it's something which I guess, more and more research needs to go into. What are such questions that you feel that still need to be researched, that still need to be discussed, and we have to get to the bottom of the mystery?
Oh, I mean, there's let's just count it. I mean, millions of questions.
Or just give me 3 or 4 questions which I think will set us all thinking, and
I mean, that's actually a very good question, but so, I mean, for each of these chapters, I sort of end with these questions, right? So, so there are questions about, for instance, for us, so one of my questions was about, I mean, now actually, what would be interesting is, we are supposed to be super tasters. India, about 85% are supposed to be super tasters, according to a study where, so we experience the intensity of taste. So given that sort of, if that's correct, given that sort of a palette, what would be interesting is that how do you then cater to that sort of a palette at a time when you have a lot of what do you call it? When the products are not organic anymore, and things are getting worse and worse, you get a lot of dross in vegetables and all of that. How do you then sort of match these two? And where do you go from here, especially after COVID? Because I think COVID has made a huge impact on malnutrition and hunger, and it's just increased things tremendously. Where do we go from here now in terms of, so that would be like one question about, taste and so demand and supply, and also, what is, and that also could be something which one could think about in terms of Indianness, because, if you're super tasters and is it going to be much more difficult to think about ways in which you combine flavors for a super particular as compared to somebody else. The
Right.
other question I would have is about the way in which we are accustomed to a particular flavor profile. And
Right.
so there have been studies again within IIT. Some researchers have looked at it,
Right.
but they basically looked at. So we don't, in our recipes, mostly we don't use the same spice. One spice will perform that unique function. So if you have
Right.
if you have green chili, you don't really put red chili powder after that, or you don't put.
Right.
If you have lemon, you don't use tamarind, right? So you don't
Right.
combine. Whereas in the West, you would combine both, but here
That's
you
right.
don't do that. So when you have that kind of a flavor profile, what
Right.
what are the implications of something like that for the way you think
That's
about
right.
it? So, yeah.
I think, taste is an area where a lot of work, of course, the person you're talking about is Professor Ganesh Bagler. No? Now, but he sort of approaches taste from the, from the perspective of, of an engineer, really, he's basically a computational engineer, no? So he's looking at, crunching this big data and finding some patterns, But I think it needs to be, more holistically viewed by by food scholars. I mean, we don't have any bona fide food scholars in our country. Everyone does food writing as a side hobby. Like an occupation, side occupation. I hope that changes and we have an like a university approved course or on food studies. So now this another area, when you're talking about new areas which sort of excited me, you mentioned the study by Godrej about what people keep in their fridge.
Yes.
Now, tell us something more about it.
Yeah, so that idea I must attribute completely to Nandini Nair of Open Magazine. So
Right.
I'd run out of ideas by then. If you write an essay a week, a month. So I said, give me an idea. What do you young people want to read about? So she said, I want to read about what do people keep in their fridge.
Right.
So I began with that.
Right.
With that question, and then I began to sort of. So it's interesting because it's all to do with how do you relate with technology and how do you. So you have like the older, say in the 1950s, 60s, people who sort of grew up at that time. They see the fridge as something that is almost miraculous. So it's a bit like how I see the internet, because I grew up in a non-internet world, and then you have the internet. So to me, the internet is miraculous. So for them, the fridge is miraculous. So they will put everything in their fridge, including batteries and gloves and all kinds of things. So that's that group. And then the next group is sort of accustomed to the fridge. So then they sort of feel like, you can store it for a few days, for maybe 2-3 days, but then get it out quickly. The modern generation sees the fridge in a very different way. It's just something like breathing for them. So, they bring things in the deep freeze, and 2 years later they could still eat it. That would eat anathema to the middle lot. So it's just about, and what was interesting to me was that, within Hindu, sort of the Hindu in customs or religion or the way in which you eat, pollution is associated with stale food. But the notion of staleness of food sort of is disappearing has disappeared quite rapidly now in the cities, particularly amongst people who have fridges.
Right.
It's not stale anymore, right? So what does that do to the way in which you think about even the religious precepts of purity and pollution? So that's another.
I think that's very interesting. This whole idea of stale food. Going out of. But I see a lot of these old ideas are coming back. We're all talking about seasonal eating. We're all talking about not throwing away any part of any vegetable. We're all talking about not eating stale food. So in a sense, history keeps coming back. But as unlike what Marx said, it should not come back as a tragedy or a farce, sort of,
Exactly.
or a farce and a tragedy.
Yeah, very quickly. Also on the stale food, some foods actually taste better when they're stale.
Right.
Not stale, but like chana, for instance, it's better to marinate it overnight and then
Right.
it tastes even better 2 days later.
That's right.
So I think it's also
I like my rajma late. I like my mutton late. I mean stale. I like my biryani stale.
yeah.
I mean, because then the juices sort of come out of the mutton and whatever. Anyway, that's I think we have covered the whole. I think once we talk about Indian food, we can keep talking. After reading your book, I felt that there are about 150 more books to be written sort of on Indian food before I think we'll have a respectable library on Indian food. I'm thankful, Shylashri, for showing the way. I just, in fact, talking about food, Mariam Reshi's book on spices, for instance, was amazing. Again, we need books like these to open up our, our universe, our mental universe. And, there is so much waiting to be discovered about Indian food. I mean, I didn't know the story of saffron in India till I read Mariam Reshi's book. So, I think every book is a moment in discovery. So, I really thank you for the effort you put in. I look forward to your next book. Hopefully,
No, we should publish the one on Bengal now. Sorry for that one.
I guess I'll have to get over my laziness and start writing. So, I think that has to happen. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope Turmeric Nation does very well. I hope you win a couple of awards and an international contract, and throw a big party for all of us. Where's the party, by the way, Shylashri?
Virtually, yes, absolutely.
No, I'll take you up on this.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
So Pawan, Pawan, by the way, it's my, Kaveri, Pawan, Ruchin, and I sort of conspired to launch Tiffin Talks, and you can find us on YouTube. So in case you want to see some of the old editions of Tiffin Talks, you can go to YouTube and find them out. We have covered, we have done a very nice series on Kashmir. In fact, tomorrow we are going to have a discussion with women entrepreneurs of Kashmir, or Jammu and Kashmir. Now, you can't just call it Kashmir. And so we are doing different things, from food to Jammu and Kashmir, from the bureaucracy to education. So we call ourselves a webinar magazine. Tiffin Talks is a webinar magazine, and
Absolutely.
we try to be as diverse as any magazine can be. Well, Pawan, any last thoughts?
Oh yes, absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. I believe this session could not have come out on a better time or better day. It's weekend, Shylashri, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching us on Zoom here on Facebook would actually don the chef's hat and would like to try some of the stuff we discussed today. It was fantastic. So much of history, so much of culture. I always tell people that food is the biggest cultural paradigm you can think of. I think beat a country as diverse as India, where every nook and corner has a different recipe and has a different way of selling and sort of consuming food. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really, really insightful. I'm sure everybody who joined us today on Facebook would have really, really enjoyed this session. Guys, please follow us on Facebook and on Instagram on our Tiffin Talks handle. We'll be uploading this video tomorrow morning on our YouTube channel as well, which is by the name Tiffin Talks. And like Sourish mentioned, we have the part 4 of the Jammu and Kashmir series coming tomorrow on women entrepreneurship. Do join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. in the evening. You'll find details on Sourish's Facebook and Kaveri Ma'am's and my Facebook account as well. And keep spreading the love, keep eating good food, keep cooking. And I wish you all the best for this one and the coming book, Shylashri. I'm sure they'll be all a big success. Till then, thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening and goodbye from Tiffin Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you.